Mewtwo, the genetic clone of the mythical Pokemon Mew. It was designed to be the world's strongest Pokemon, even stronger than Mew. Through extensive research, travels to South America, or what would later be known as Mirage Island, Team Rocket scientists, with the help of Dr. Fuji, were able to collect what they believed to be a Mew fossil. Using Mew's DNA and human ingenuity, they were able to clone a specimen as powerful, if not stronger, than Mew itself, although not without trial and error, of course. Upon finally gaining consciousness, Mewtwo realized what it really was, that it was not born a Pokemon, but created. He was nothing more than an experiment for the humans that created him. Using its awesome psychic powers, Mewtwo broke free of the scientist's captivity and destroyed the lab that it was created in. Upon its destruction, Giovanni says he can help Mewtwo master its psychic powers. The two work together so that Mewtwo can master its abilities, but upon doing so, Mewtwo realizes that it is not equal to Giovanni, not equal to humans. It escapes and declares that it is the strongest Pokemon in the world, stronger even than Mew. But while that may have been true in Generation 1, would Mewtwo still be considered the strongest Pokemon even today? The existence of many legendary Pokemon have been recorded and documented over the years since Mewtwo's creation. Many myths and legends explored and researched. Many Pokemon that could potentially dethrone Mewtwo as the world's strongest Pokemon, especially when compared to the likes of world-ending beings like Groudon and Kyogre, or deities that control time and space like Dialga and Palkia, or even the mighty creation Pokemon Arceus. But what if I said that through all my research, after all my studies of Mewtwo's power and lore, that even to this day, Mewtwo is still the world's strongest Pokemon? You may not believe me, since Sinnoh's mythos contains the creation trio and Arceus, beings that govern the universe and all existence, but Mewtwo is a special Pokemon. Allow me to share my findings with you all and reveal the truth behind why Mewtwo is in fact still the world's strongest Pokemon. Before our discussion begins, I need to address that we will look at both the games and anime for this explanation of Mewtwo's strength and power, as to allow us to have an all-encompassing understanding of Mewtwo the best we can. Much of the lore within the games and anime overlaps, so I will specify if certain information comes from one canon or the other in certain instances. But let us begin with the birth of Mewtwo, for it is Mewtwo's very being and how it came into existence that makes it stand apart from every other legendary. Legendary Pokemon have an innate sense of power and awe. They possess strength that far exceeds that of regular Pokemon. Many possess special attributes that allow them to control the land and ocean, such as Groudon and Kyogre. Some keep the world in balance, like the Order Pokemon Zygarde. And some are powerful beings that embody the values humans hold dear, such as truth and ideals with Reshiram and Zekrom. But what if you create your own legendary Pokemon using the power of another? I know mythical Pokemon are often separated from legendary Pokemon, but they are still a subset of legendary Pokemon despite how technical the debate is among Pokemon scholars. So for all intents and purposes, Mew will be classified as a legendary Pokemon for the remainder of our discussion. Before Mewtwo's creation in the time of Gen 1, Mew was the strongest Pokemon among the original 150 Pokemon, as prior to Mewtwo's creation, Kanto only had 150 Pokemon. The legendary birds of Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno also exist, but their power pales in comparison to that of the mythical Mew. Mew is a being said to be the ancestor of every living Pokemon currently known to humankind, said to contain the genes of all Pokemon. Being in the subset of mythical Pokemon, Mew has a base stat total of 600, with 100 points across the board in each stat. At first glance, this doesn't make Mew stand out that much, as all mythical Pokemon share this same base stat total, such as Shaymin, Darkrai, Jirachi, and Celebi. But Mew's power is unlike those of other Pokemon. Mew is the only Pokemon capable of learning every single Pokemon move in existence, since it contains the genes of all Pokemon in the world. Mew is also the only Pokemon that has been researched to a degree of this magnitude by any group of scientists, as Mew is the Pokemon whose research has been funded extensively to successfully complete cloning experiments. Now later on, Team Plasma would create their Genesect using its original DNA and enhance its body with cybernetic technology, but that is not the same as this instance here, since Mew was specifically cloned, which is a much different process than simply enhancing an already extinct Pokemon. Genesect is also a bug steel type rather than the psychic type. Mew is so strong and so rare that it was sought after for quite some time, with the idea that its DNA could create the world's strongest Pokemon. We see in the first movie a group of scientists making travels to find Mew to harness its DNA for their experiments and actually find a Mew fossil. Although it's quite interesting that they say fossil, which would imply that Mew died and went extinct at some point in the past. But we know that's not true, as it's well and alive in the first movie, although it could be inferred that Mew at some point reproduces, somehow to keep its species alive. But if Mew is able to learn all known Pokemon moves and also contains the genes of all Pokemon, then one could say it's essentially like having the strength of all Pokemon. Mew can even take the shape of any Pokemon it so chooses. We clearly see this in the first episode of Pokemon Journeys as Go chases after Mew. Scholars also discuss how Mew bears resemblance to the Lake Trio from the Sinnoh region, as they all share the psychic typing and have similar body shapes and the same kind of tail as well. Now, while Mew may not be the strongest legendary Pokemon, as that title could easily go to Arceus, the god of the Pokemon world, why would Mew's DNA be considered the strongest? Well, it's simply for the fact that during Gen 1's history, Mew was the strongest legendary, as it was stronger than Kanto's legendary birds and had no rival prior to Mewtwo's creation. But even Mew possesses powers that Arceus does not, such as being able to learn all known Pokemon moves and take the shape of any Pokemon it wants. By enhancing those attributes through human experimentation and ingenuity, Mew's DNA can be altered and enhanced to create a stronger being. This is what led to the birth and creation of Mewtwo. Now that we understand what makes Mew stand apart from other legendary Pokemon and why its DNA was so crucial to creating Mewtwo, we need to understand Mewtwo itself. Of course, we know it was cloned from Mew, but that's just the surface. The lore goes far deeper than that. Across the canon lore of the game universe, the manga, and the anime, we know that scientists, many working in tandem with Team Rocket led by Giovanni, attempted many experiments in successfully cloning Mew. The goal was to create the world's strongest Pokemon unlike anyone had ever seen, stronger even than Mew. With Mew's power contained in this new clone, whosoever controlled it would wield ultimate power. In terms of Giovanni's goal with Team Rocket to control Kanto and capture the region's strongest Pokemon, Mewtwo would be instrumental in this endeavor and would leave him unopposed by any other trainer in the region, even the members of the Elite Four. To Giovanni, Pokemon are nothing but tools to assist Team Rocket's goals, since those are his views as a ruthless businessman. And Mewtwo does in some capacity possess many of the traits that Giovanni carries: his ruthlessness, his cold-heartedness, his intimidating demeanor. And this is worth noting, as if we dive further into the creation of Mewtwo, we uncover that Mewtwo isn't just a clone of Mew, but is actually a human Pokemon hybrid. The games and anime give many hints about the lore and creation of Mewtwo, but only the manga dives deep into explaining the full story. All three canons make it clear that Dr. Fuji was explicitly involved in Mewtwo's creation, but in the manga, it's revealed that more famous Kanto characters were involved in Team Rocket's schemes, the most notable being Blaine. You see, Blaine is the reason that Mewtwo isn't just a clone, but a hybrid. In the manga, Blaine actually infused Mewtwo's DNA with his own human DNA during the cloning process. This would explain why Mewtwo looks so much different than Mew. There's a distinct height difference, it has two necks, it has a clearly defined chest, a longer and bigger tail, as well as longer arms and bigger, more pronounced fingers. Combine this with the fact that Mewtwo can speak human language via telepathy and has an insanely high intellect along with self-awareness, one can easily infer that it contains human DNA beyond it being significantly humanoid. So Mewtwo already has a much higher advantage when it comes to a legendary Pokemon. It has a much higher intellect, already has one of the best typings among all Pokemon, and has the strength of the ancestor to all Pokemon. But Mewtwo's personality also sets it apart as well, and I don't mean what this Pokemon is known for, such as Darkrai being mischievous and giving people nightmares. No, Mewtwo has a distinct personality that it was born with due to its environment, its DNA mixture, and its trauma. Yes, Mewtwo has trauma. This is explored in the Birth of Mewtwo special that aired in Japan before the first Pokemon movie and would later be dubbed for other countries. In this special, we get to see Mewtwo going through its development phase during the cloning process, but we also see Dr. Fuji attempting to make a clone of his deceased daughter, Amber. In the original version, he is actually attempting to revive her using a sample of her DNA. There's lots of ethical concerns that come into play here during this mad process, but it is here where we see the essence of Mewtwo take form. There is a dream sequence where Mewtwo, Amber 2, Fuji's potential clone daughter, Bulbasaur 2, Charmander 2, and Squirtle 2, and yes, these are all their canon names in the official media, they are linked telepathically in their cloning pods. They're together, enjoying each other's company, and then things get dark. to say the least. It is stated in the first Pokemon movie that many experiments failed before Mewtwo was the first specimen to be cloned successfully, to survive the cloning process. Dr. Fuji even says this directly to Mewtwo, which, while I can't imagine Dr. Fuji would have known about Mewtwo's connection to the other cloning specimens, is just a massive slap in the face to Mewtwo and his dead friends. Mewtwo was born, nay created a Pokemon in Fuji's lab already filled with his grief and sorrow, as well as anger and rage that these humans cared nothing for him. In retaliation, he attacks them and completely and utterly destroys the lab he was residing in all this time. So we already have a super dark beginning from Mewtwo, which drastically shapes its personality and outlook on life. But if we take it a step further, it's also shaped by Giovanni's mentorship, where he trained Mewtwo to properly control and harness his psychic powers. But by the end, when he sees that Giovanni only wants to use him as a tool, he leaves Giovanni and attacks him as well. Mewtwo has a backstory that most other legendary Pokemon do not have, a history filled with pain, substance, hurt, grief, and existential and philosophical concerns most of all. Mewtwo does not have the light and carefree spirit of Mew. It has a dark and closed heart that only the purest of humans with good will, like Ash Ketchum, were able to change. Mewtwo's intellect combined with its training, its psychic abilities, and dark backstory come together to give it an innate ruthless nature and destructive presence that truly knows no bounds. But with Mewtwo being the unique individual that it is, how does it compare to other legendary Pokemon over the years and even this day and age? Does Mewtwo's power still keep it on the pedestal of strongest Pokemon? Let us analyze further. As we've discussed so far in our analysis today, we know that Mewtwo is a Psychic-type legendary Pokemon from Kanto, created by not only harvesting and cloning Mew's DNA, but also fusing it with human DNA as well. We now understand its tragic backstory and what has driven it to act in the manner it does, but is that enough to stand up to other legendary Pokemon head-on? Let's begin simply with its concrete game data. It's a legendary Psychic-type Pokemon with a base stat total of 680, making it a whole 80 base points stronger than Mew, with HP of 106, attack of 110, defense of 90, special attack of 154, special defense of 90, and speed of 130. At face value, we can clearly see that Mewtwo is objectively stronger than Mew. Of course, its base stat total clearly gives that away, but it's far stronger than Mew in terms of special attack and much faster with that 130 speed stat. Its ability is also Pressure, which would, in the games at least, cause Mew to use up its moves a lot faster. Maybe in the anime this would translate to Mew using up its energy a lot faster, since the first Pokemon movie aired in a time where abilities didn't exist or weren't yet known about. It's uncertain if that's how Mewtwo's pressure ability would function. So we've established that Mewtwo is objectively stronger than Mew from an in-game standpoint, but in the anime we can clearly see that they are evenly matched. If a direct hit does manage to land, however, it will deal good damage, but both Pokemon can endure hits very well. But this is exactly why a game standpoint isn't the best way to approach this analysis. I will further discuss base stats of other legendary Pokemon, but will from there mainly dive into the strength of these Pokemon lore-wise, as it allows their powers and strengths to stretch further beyond any game limitations. To make this investigation more precise, we'll only be looking at the Pokemon that can actually rival Mew in the games and those that are technically stronger due to base stat totals. To this day, there are only 13 other legendary Pokemon that can rival Mewtwo in strength and power, which are the Tower Duo of Ho-Oh and Lugia, the Sky-High Pokemon Rayquaza, the Creation Trio of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, also including their origin forms, Reshiram and Zekrom from Unova, Xerneas and Yveltal from Kalos, Solgaleo and Lunala from Alola, and the Ice Rider and Shadow Rider forms of Calyrex. Granted, this is more so a powered-up form, so it doesn't entirely count here. So we'll reduce our number to 11, only 11 legendary Pokemon being able to rival the strength and power of Mewtwo after all this time. But if this is the case, are there any Pokemon truly stronger than Mewtwo? Well, yes. There are. Only 2 legendary Pokemon in this world possess power beyond Mewtwo's, with the first answer being extremely obvious: Arceus. Arceus is the alpha Pokemon, the one that created all there is in this world, in this universe. As the created god of the Pokemon world, it is only natural that its power far exceeds that of Mewtwo and any other Pokemon in existence. It also has access to all 18 typings via its plates that it carries with it, so Arceus could easily just apply the Dread Plate and be immune to all of Mewtwo's psychic type attacks. But with its divine power, it could very well defeat Mewtwo. But the other legendary Pokemon able to take on Mewtwo actually comes from Galar, being Eternatus. This Pokemon, known for causing the darkest day in Galar's history and providing the region with the Dynamax phenomenon, has a base stat total of 690. While only having 10 more base stat points than Mewtwo, it technically is stronger at face value. However, Eternatus possesses the Poison Dragon typing, and since Dragon doesn't resist the Psychic type, it becomes weak to Mewtwo since it's a Poison type. So realistically, it seems like Mewtwo still has the edge here, even though Eternatus technically has the higher base stat total. But now let's look at legendary Pokemon that can become stronger than Mewtwo via battle mechanics or taking on new forms to gain more power. There are 10 Pokemon that have the ability to become stronger than Mewtwo, being Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, Mega Rayquaza, Mega Latios, Mega Latias, Kyurem if it fuses with either Zekrom or Reshiram, Complete Form Zygarde, Crown Sword Zacian, Crown Shield Zamazenta, and Eternamax Eternatus. All these legendary Pokemon acquire new forms to gain more power and become stronger, with base stats of 700, 708, 720, 770, or 780, and then a massive base stat total of 1125 in the case of Eternamax Eternatus. But that's a very special circumstance that can't be used in-game, and in the anime also requires special conditions to be met outside of Eternatus' control. Now that we know which Pokemon can stand up to Mewtwo, we need to see how Mewtwo's powers stack up to those of the aforementioned legendary Pokemon. Does Mewtwo have what it takes to hold its own against these legendary Pokemon? Let's see what our research has to say. As I previously stated, my research has found that 11 different legendary Pokemon are on the same power level as Mewtwo, but to understand if Mewtwo's power can defeat them, we first need to understand what each Pokemon is capable of. Let's begin with the tower duo of Lugia and Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is a fire flying type from Johto that roosts atop the bell tower. This regal legendary bird is capable of reviving dead Pokemon as seen in the lore of the legendary beasts of Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Although revival is a power I don't think would be all that helpful in a battle. It does possess powerful moves with its signature move being Sacred Fire. In essence, it is a much more divine version of Moltres. With Lugia, it is said to be able to create 40 days storms. In Pokemon the Movie 2000, Lugia's power along with the imbalance caused by Lawrence III threatened to flood the world, so creating a 40-day storm may be a toned-down version of this world-ending power. If we look to Rayquaza, this dragon flying type is so powerful it is able to quell the scuffles between Groudon and Kyogre, two other world-ending beings. It also lives in the Earth's ozone layer, protecting it from threats from space. One such threat being Deoxys, which we can see it battling in the 7th film, Destiny Deoxys. It also swiftly defeated Deoxys with a point-blank Hyper Beam. When it comes to the creation trio of Sinnoh, Dialga has the power to govern time and control it. Palkia is the being that rules over all of space, and Giratina rules over the Distortion World, the realm of antimatter. But being that they were created directly by Arceus shortly after the universe was created so they could govern it shows the power they possess. In the 10th film, The Rise of Darkrai, we can see Dialga and Palkia's power on display, the power they can exude, the danger they pose, and this begins to destroy a small town known as Alamos and wipe it from existence. These Pokemon are essentially deities, and we've seen Dialga and Giratina battle during the 11th film, Giratina and the Sky Warrior. Then in the 12th film, Arceus and the Jewel of Life, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina combine their forces to combat Arceus. In Unova, that region's history and lore speaks of Zekrom and Reshiram, two extremely powerful dragon-type Pokemon that were used by the region's original two brothers that ruled the two kingdoms of Unova. These dragons possess immense power that humans sought fit for war, these two dragons also being able to power up Kyurem in its alternate forms, since they all came from the one original Unovan dragon. Then with Xerneas and Yveltal, you have one that can cause massive death and destruction to widespread areas, while the other can immediately restore the lives and life force of those struck by this dark power. Finally, with Solgaleo and Lunala, we have two legendary Pokemon that are also classified as Ultra Beasts since they do indeed come from different dimensions, and they are known as the emissaries of the Sun and Moon respectively. They are imbued with powerful light energy and are essentially celestial beings that govern the Sun and Moon. But now let's dive into the Pokemon that can become stronger and gain more power to be stronger than Mewtwo. Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre can contain immense levels of infinity energy within their bodies, which makes them revert to primordial states that enhance their powers even further, which we can see in the Pokemon XY Mega Evolution specials. Primal Groudon and Kyogre elevate their base stat totals to 770 when entering these states. Of course, this makes their abilities to end the world via earthquake, seismic activity, tidal waves, and flooding all the more deadly. When it comes to Rayquaza, as long as it contains enough infinity energy within itself and knows the move Dragon Ascent, extent, it can actually Mega Evolve on its own accord without the need for a trainer. This makes it one of only 2 legendary Pokemon being capable of doing so. Rayquaza becomes the mightiest of dragons upon Mega Evolving, even becoming more powerful than the deities of time and space, Dialga and Palkia, with a base stat total of 780. Mega Latios and Mega Latias gain base stat totals of 700. Zygarde gains a base stat total of 708 upon reaching its complete and ultimate form. The crowned forms of Zacian and Zamazenta receive base stat totals of 720 in Generation 8 and then decrease to 700 in Generation 9, but still are stronger than Mewtwo. And when it comes to the black and white forms of Kyurem, it's interesting because these forms result from experimentation from Team Plasma using the DNA splicers, another form of genetic manipulation that results in Pokemon fusion, these forms also reaching base stat totals of 700. And lastly is Eternatus's Gigantamax form, which if it was ever able to obtain this higher form again, this would make it the definitively strongest Pokemon in the world, with a base stat total of a gargantuan stat of 1,125, an absolutely absurd and ludicrous number in terms of Pokemon stats. So how could Mewtwo possibly stack up to these powerful beings that can take away life, restore life, and revive other Pokemon, cause world-ending calamities, and that govern the very universe? Would it really be able to go toe-to-toe with Pokemon that can harness infinity energy or fuse with other Pokemon? Is Mewtwo really that powerful? Well, the answer is yes, Mewtwo also possesses that power. Mewtwo possesses immense psychic power unlike any other Pokemon in the world, and it is one of a select group of Pokemon shown in the anime that is capable of communicating via telepathy. Mewtwo has shown some incredible feats in the anime as well, such as rendering an Alakazam useless in battle, which is the poster child for a strong psychic type and the psychic type in general. It has been shown stopping an entire herd of Tauros dead in their tracks. Of course, it infamously destroyed the lab where it was created after breaking out of its cloning containment unit. It obliterated Giovanni's building after he had betrayed Mewtwo's trust, and even beyond its psychic powers, Mewtwo has great intellectual prowess as well. On New Island in the first Pokemon movie, it is shown and revealed that Mewtwo rebuilt the entire lab as well as the island's castle structure, we can only assume by himself. Mewtwo seems to have incredible memory and ingenuity in order to recreate the lab it was created in perfectly. But what about Mewtwo's power truly makes it the strongest? What makes Mewtwo able to stand up to world-ending beings like Groudon and Kyogre, deities like Palkia and Dialga? Through my extensive research, I've uncovered some incredible details about Mewtwo's power that truly displays why it can still be the strongest. Like Lugia, Mewtwo also possesses the power to create severe and deadly storms. In the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo creates a deadly storm to test the strength of the trainers that want to reach New Island. Only those brave enough to make it through the storm would be considered worthy. This storm is rough, deadly, severe, and absolutely monstrous. It's made even more threatening due to the fact that Mewtwo created this entire storm with quite literally the flick of its wrist as it waves its hand around in a circular motion. So we can clearly see that Mewtwo didn't even break a sweat to create this storm, nor did it use a substantial fraction of its power to do so, which says an awful lot about Mewtwo's full power. And in the Pokemon Special Prologue to Awakening, Mewtwo achieves another feat with its psychic powers, as it manipulates the vast majority of a nearby lake to condense it into a concentrated whirlpool and then release it over an entire forest to put out a fire. Quite the display of power. However, there are two abilities that Mewtwo possesses that could make it even more threatening than other legendary Pokemon. The first we need to discuss is Mewtwo's insane ability to negate the special abilities of Pokemon. In the first Pokemon movie, when we arrive at the confrontation between Mewtwo and his cloned Pokemon and Ash and the original Pokemon, Mewtwo states,
"I will block all the Pokemon's special abilities using my psychic powers. Now we shall see who triumphs. Go!"
To this day, there have been no other instances of any sort of other Pokemon being able to completely negate the special abilities of another Pokemon. There have been instances, however, where Pokemon have been temporarily able to limit the abilities of other Pokemon. One notable example is the Dark Energy Field created by Darkrai in the 10th film, The Rise of Darkrai. This field immobilizes Palkia and Dialga and temporarily blocks their ability to use any powers or moves. However, this came at a cost. This required Darkrai to actively maintain this dark field to hold back Dialga and Palkia. In contrast, Mewtwo was able to completely focus on his battle with Mew while still blocking the Pokemon's special abilities. This gives a clear indication of just how immense the Mewtwo's power is, since he is barely exerting any energy to block the abilities of the Pokemon here. But the next ability this Pokemon possesses is presumably even more powerful, unlike anything mentioned thus far. Let's also acknowledge the fact that Mewtwo has the ability to materialize matter at will, as shown here when it creates its custom Pokeballs to capture everyone's Pokemon on New Island. Its psychic powers actually manifest new matter out of thin air, an ability no other Pokemon possesses. Let's fast forward to Generation 5. During this time, we'd be given the movie Genesect and the Legend Awakened. This movie would give us our first look at the concept of Mega Evolution, simply referred to back then as a powerful transformation. As we now know today, Mega Evolution is only capable in certain Pokemon, and to achieve this form, a strong bond between a trainer and Pokemon is needed, as well as the Keystone and the appropriate Mega Stone. But here in this movie, we see that Mewtwo is one of two Pokemon capable of Mega Evolving without a trainer's bond. Or is it? So the other Pokemon is Rayquaza, which can Mega Evolve under its own power if exposed to high levels of Infinity Energy and knows the move Dragon Ascent. However, Mewtwo can Mega Evolve into two different forms, being its X version and its Y version. Mewtwo also doesn't need to know a specific move either to achieve this state. So is it simply capable of achieving this form by sheer will? What about its biological and genetic makeup allows it to access this power on its own? For those answers, we now need to research the Pokemon manga. In the Pokemon Adventures manga, the stories can differ quite wildly from the ones we know from the games and anime. One such variation is in the backstory of Mewtwo's creation. In the manga, it's explicitly revealed that Blaine, the gym leader of Cinnabar Island, had fused his own DNA with Mew's during the cloning process. In contrast, it is never stated that Mewtwo contains human DNA in the games or anime. Mewtwo having human DNA integrated into its genetics could potentially explain why Mewtwo is able to undergo Mega Evolution without having a legitimate trainer. It could be argued that Mewtwo has some innate bond with Blaine that makes it capable of doing so. In the manga, Blaine and Mewtwo have even been able to communicate telepathically. Therefore, this could be seen as Mewtwo being quote-unquote connected to a trainer without actually having one. So this biological and genetic connection is what allows Mewtwo to Mega Evolve into its two different forms. Its two forms also resembling an enhancement in Mewtwo's aggressive battling nature as shown in its X variant, and an enhancement in its genes that are more similar to Mew as shown in its Y variant. This truly sets it apart from other legendary Pokemon, and also makes it so that Mewtwo's intellect would be greatly heightened, not only because it's a psychic type, but because it has the genes of a human as well, which naturally have high intellect as a result of evolution and progression over time. But we're still not done, as there's one final aspect to Mewtwo that truly showcases why it's so powerful, and that of course is Mew's DNA. Now you're probably wondering what I'm talking about, as I've already discussed that Mewtwo was created using Mew's DNA. But there's an aspect that you probably haven't even considered in regards to Mew's DNA. I know I certainly didn't until I discussed this with fellow Pokemon researcher Professor Toby. You see, Mew is the only Pokemon that has the ability to learn every single Pokemon move, and this is because it contains the DNA of all existing Pokemon. And while Mewtwo isn't able to learn every move, it would likely still possess a key feature from Mew's DNA: adaptability. Being able to adapt to your environment and surroundings as time progresses is a key necessity in the evolution of any species. This adaptability may also be another underlying reason why Mewtwo is able to possess two different forms of Mega Evolution. It's also worth noting that Mew itself is incapable of undergoing Mega Evolution, while in contrast, Mewtwo can. This adaptability in its genes grants it access to two different powered up states, allowing it to possess power far stronger than Mew could ever dream of. Now that we've discussed Mewtwo's abilities and powers, is it still safe to say Mewtwo is the strongest Pokemon? Well, after much hypothesizing, extensive research, and discussion with my colleagues, I do believe Mewtwo is still the strongest Pokemon to this day. With how many legendary Pokemon exist in today's world, only a handful can rival Mewtwo, many also being unable to Mega Evolve, attain a different form, or higher power. Mewtwo was created specifically to be the world's strongest Pokemon, and thus contains Mew's genes, which also contain the genes of all known Pokemon in the world, providing it with immense strength and power. Mewtwo on many occasions has been seen using only a fraction of its power, and while it can be weakened, it takes many powerful Pokemon to do so. Otherwise, this only happens when humans intervene with technology. Let us not discredit Mewtwo's power either, as countless other legendary Pokemon have been subdued and contained by human technology over the years, an infamous example being Dialga and Palkia by Cyrus atop Spear Pillar via the Red Chain. Mewtwo is the product of human ingenuity combined with natural Pokemon strength and power from Mew. Its powers truly are unrivaled, as the only Pokemon that are definitively stronger than it are Returnamax Eternatus and Arceus. Of course, other legendary Pokemon like Mega Rayquaza, Zygarde, Primal Groudon and Kyogre, or the crown forms of Zacian and Zamazenta can rival Mewtwo's strength. They only do so with powered up forms, which only raise their power above Mewtwo's base stat. Once it Mega Evolves, its power outmatches that of all other legendary Pokemon, and it can even attain this power at will due to having human DNA within itself. These forms grant it so much power that they are technically even stronger than Arceus from a game standpoint, with a base stat total of 780 each. Even in the manga or anime, I think that's a fine case to make for it being stronger than Arceus. Yes, even after 25 plus years of discovery and research into other Pokemon around the Pokemon world, Mewtwo remains the world's strongest Pokemon due to being created from Mew's DNA and intense gene splicing experiments. Its psychic powers are unmatched, and only a small handful of legendary Pokemon can attempt to match its strength. Mewtwo may not have the same abilities as other legendary Pokemon, but it shares some similarities, and from what we've seen, it can achieve the same strength with a fraction of its power. It was designed to be the world's strongest Pokemon, and it was a success.